Okay. All right. All right. At the top here, we're just going to do, this is just like a review problem. Hello. Okay. We're just going to do a little review at the top. How would you solve this equation I got at the top? Somebody just like raise your hand, walk me through, like what would you do? Bree, go ahead, Bree. What would you do first?
Add 12.
All right.
Both sides.
So I got 4x plus 3 squared. If I add 12 to 388, it'll be 400. What do you want to do next?
Divide by 4.
Okay, divide by 4. I'm just not writing it. We're going to divide by 4, so that'll give us 100. Then what do you want to do? Good. Do not FOIL. Whoever FOILed, I'm judging you. Okay, so don't do that. You want those parentheses. You're going to see this in a lot of questions today. We want that because we could just get rid of the parentheses, then we don't have to FOIL. Okay, now, what am I going to write down for square root of 100? Plus or, don't forget the plus or minus, perfect. Okay, now all you got to do here to get x totally alone, I do need to subtract the 3. So I would just recommend just write that right after the equal sign and just kind of slide the plus minus 10 down a little bit. Now, in this case, negative 3 and 10, they're both plain numbers, so you can actually get farther in this question because I can take negative 3 plus 10 and I can take negative 3 minus 10. Some questions you can do that with, some you can't. It just depends on the problem. But if they're just constant terms, those are just nice numbers, you can go ahead and simplify this. So this would be 7 and negative 13 as my two answers. And if you want to, you can plug them back in to check in the original problem. They should give you the answer that you are looking for. What we're going to try to do today is create situations where we have a set of parentheses that's squared so we can cancel out the squared by taking the square root. And to do that, we are going to use these things called perfect square trinomials. So just, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is. We're going to see if you can figure it out. So I have two examples here. So I have perfect square trinomial here. This is x squared plus 10x plus 25. And then I have a different one here. These are both in standard form. X squared minus 14x plus 49. Okay, somebody raise your hand and tell me. You can factor these. All right, can you tell me for this one, two numbers that I got to multiply to get 25, add to get 10? 5 and 5. Okay, now, so this would be x plus 5 times x plus 5, or we squish it together, right? If they're exactly the same, you can squish that together and write that as x plus 5 squared, which, similar to the problem we were just looking at, this is what we want today, because then we can get rid of that squared by taking the square root. What are two numbers multiplied to give you positive 49, add to give you negative 14? Negative 7, negative 7. Now, if you want to just, like I'm writing this out just to kind of show you where it comes from, but if you want to skip that step and just know, okay, these two factors can be squished together because they're both the same, then you can go ahead and do that. So just in general, perfect square trinomial means, trinomial is just 3 terms. So perfect square trinomial, we're talking about a quadratic with 3 terms. Both factors are the same, is all that happens anytime you have a perfect square trinomial. Just means both factors are the same. Okay, now what we're going to do, and this might sound a little evil, but we're going to manipulate some of these questions for our purposes to make them easier to solve. All right, so to do that, we're going to try to create a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, all that needs to happen, all right, and I'm going to write this down. I'm going to write general standard form here, ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, what we're going to do here, and I'm going to set that equal to 0 real quick. For all the questions we're going to work on today, the a value will be 1, so it won't be a problem for any of the questions today, but this process has to have that squared term only having a coefficient of 1. We'll deal with how to do that if it's a different number next time. So for this one, what's going to happen here to create this? Your constant term or your plain number, that's c in that formula, has to be the b value, which is whatever's in front of your plain x, your linear term, divided by 2 squared. So I call that the magic number. I don't think that's probably called that in a textbook or anything like that. But if you can take the b value divided by 2 squared, that should be the plain number to get yourself a perfect square trinomial. So we're just going to practice doing this here. These aren't equations or anything like this. I'm just going to have us find the value to create our perfect square trinomial. So all you got to do is find whatever is in front of the plane x. So like here I've got 20, here I've got -8, here I've got -3. All you do, take that b value, this first one is 20, divide it by 2 and square it. Now, if you can actually divide, go ahead and do that. So 20 divided by 2 is 10, right? And what would you write down for 10 squared? 100. So that's what I would put right here, and that'll create a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so let's just check that. Can you think two numbers, when you multiply them you get 100, you add them you get 20? 10 and 10. So this would just be x plus 10 squared in your factored form. Okay, if the number's negative, like this next one is, right? So it's the b value, which is -8. It's always divided by 2 and squared. That would be -4 squared. If I square -4, what will we get? 16. Now, so doesn't matter if the number is positive or the number is negative for your b value, you should always be squaring it, so you will always, this will always be a positive number. Okay, what are two numbers when you multiply them you get positive 16, you add them you get -8? -4, right, for both? All right, so, and I'm going to make this connection just on this question real quick. So if you guys look here, whatever you squared, like here I squared 10, that is what's in the factor with the x. Here we squared -4, that's what's in the factor with the x. Okay, now when I do the next question, that might make a little bit more sense why I'm pointing that out to you. Now, this one, I have a b value as -3. The other two questions we just did, the b value was even. If it's ever odd, I can't actually divide that, right? -3 divided by 2 doesn't simplify or anything like that. So this is actually going to be a fraction when you square it. You can square this, just square the top and the bottom. This is going to become on the top +9, -3 times -3, and then 2 times 2 will be 4. So that is what I would add to create that perfect square trinomial. And then you're probably like, oh, I don't know what the factors are. But remember what I literally just told you. Whatever you square, that's what goes in the x with the factor. So we squared -3 over 2. Factored form here would just be x minus 3 over 2 squared. And you don't want to convert that into a decimal. All right, so that'd be like 1.5. Don't do that, because when you actually solve the problems, you're going to want to leave it as a fraction. You'll see that when we get to the other side of the paper here. But whatever you square, that's what you use to complete your factor. And if you wanted to FOIL this out to check, you should get back what I have written right there. Okay, now at the bottom, I just have like a little bit different format. We're going to work backwards. So this gives you the constant term, and it says, okay, what should k be? Anybody have any idea what k should be? Okay, here, I'll just show you. It should be 10. Okay, let me show you. If you want to use a little formula for it, remember I told you the constant is the b value divided by 2 squared. So if you know the constant, b is represented with a k in this particular question, you could work backwards from that formula. So like I would take the square root. Now, technically when I take the square root, I should put plus or minus 5, k over 2, and then multiply both sides by 2. So this would become plus or minus 10. There's actually two ways I could complete the square. In this particular case, it just says plus k, so k would be positive 10 here, but if it had the minus sign right in front of that, then it could be negative. It could be either one of them, but the way this is set up, I would just put in a 10. Okay, so for this one, and again, you might be able to just figure it out, or you can work backwards. Your constant term is 121, and that should be the b value, which is represented with k here over 2 squared. So I would just take square root of both sides, so it could be 11 or -11. And that would give me k over 2, multiply both sides by 2. So two possible k values could create a perfect square trinomial here. In this case, since it's negative, it would be -22. Or actually, like if I was typing this in Math Excel, if the negative is already in the problem right there for me, I would just put in 22 there for k. All right, is anybody having a question? Okay, don't freak out when you turn the page. I promise it's not that big of a deal. Okay, now, at the top of the page here, I literally just have like a step-by-step process of what I'm going to show you, but I'm just going to, that's more for if you want to go back and read it, you can have it. I'm just going to walk you through what I'm going to do. First thing, it does say the A value has to be 1. You're not going to see anything other than that in any of the questions today. Now, what I would tell you to do, you want your squared term, your x squared, and your x on one side, any other plain numbers you want on the right side. So what I'm going to do here just real quick, I'm going to move the 15 to the other side of the equation, just added it. It was being subtracted, so I'm going to add it. Okay, and I'm going to set up kind of what we did on the front, a little different because we actually have an equation here, but I'm going to create a perfect square trinomial on the left side. So what I do for myself when I do that, just put the x squared, and in this case minus 6x, and then I put plus, and then I just put literally like a little blank spot because I'm going to complete the square. Now, the other side of the equation, this will be a little different from what it looked like on the front because we're actually solving a problem here. Whatever I do to that left side, I'm going to have to do the same thing to the right side to keep the equation balanced. So when I complete the square, I'm going to do that on the left. On the right, I'm going to have to add that number to the other side as well. Okay, here's the deal. You're going to take your b value, for this question it's -6, divided by 2 squared. For that problem, it'd be -3 squared. That'll complete my square. So what number am I going to add to both sides? 9. Okay. Now, what would you write on the left side as your factor? Just raise your hand and tell me. On the left side, what would the factored form of x squared minus 6x plus 9 be? Perfect. So this is x minus 3 squared. Now, on the other side, you're literally just going to add those numbers together. So 15 and 9 are going to give you 24. Once you're there, this is what you want because we can get rid of that squared by just taking square root. Just don't forget, when we introduce the square root into the problem, like I put that radical in there to help me solve it, we got to put a plus and minus. So this would be x minus 3 plus minus square root of 24. Now, unfortunately, that's not a perfect square. So how would you, and we could do factor tree or biggest perfect square, whatever you like better. How would I break down 24 under a square root? Yeah. 2, good. If it was, I would do like 4 times 6, biggest perfect square. So you're going to pull out a 2. So this would be 2 roots of 6 in simplest radical form. Now, the only other thing I have to do real quick to get x totally alone, I got to move that 3. So it's being subtracted, I would add it. For what you want to do in this problem, I would just recommend, if you do that and you have to add something to the other side and you got a plus and minus, just put that right after the equal sign, so 3, and then you can't do anything else here other than simplify the radical like we already did. I can't actually add or subtract with the 3, so that's just going to be our answer. It's 2 different answers. The plus minus is just a shorthand way of writing it. Is anybody having a question at the moment? Okay. The problem next is the same thing. I'm going to say let's put the squared term and the linear term, which is just going to have your x, so x squared and x terms on one side, anything else on the other. To do that in this problem, I'm going to need to move 16x, so I'm going to add that over here, and I'm also going to need to move the 89. So that's positive, so I'm going to subtract 89 to the other side. So what that would look like, x squared plus 16x, there's my quadratic term and my linear term. And then this is just what I do. I just leave plus and leave a little spot for me to complete the square. The other side, since I had to move the 89, I had to subtract that. So it'd be negative 89. And then I'm also just going to leave plus a little blank. So I remember when I complete the square, whatever I do to one side, we got to do to the other side. Okie dokie. We're going to take 16 divided by 2 squared, b value divided by 2 squared. So that would be 8 squared. What am I going to add to both sides? 64. Sweet. Okay. What would my factored form be on the left side? X plus 8. Perfect. Sorry, I should ask people. I should call on people, but I don't feel like it. Okay. Now, don't judge me. Negative 89 plus 64 is negative 25. I just didn't want to get that wrong. And last week you would have told me, Miss Brody, this has no real solution, which is true, but it does have solutions in imaginary land. So What is the square root of negative 25? 5i, exciting. Okay, only to me. All right, plus or minus, this would be 5i. So even though we got an imaginary involved here, we do still have the plus and minus symbol. And the only other thing I got to do here is move the 8 away from the x. So to do that, we would subtract it. And this is going to be similar to that last problem. You're not actually going to be able to go a step farther here. It's just going to be negative 8 plus or minus 5i. I can't add that real number, negative 8, to the imaginary number, 5i. So two answers here. They're both just imaginary. Is anybody having a question? Okay. Now, these ones are a little bit more work because they're going to involve a fraction, but I'm going to tell you to do the same thing. I'm going to keep my squared term and my linear term, so my x squared and my 9x, I'm going to keep those where they're at. I'm going to write plus and leave a little blank, and any plain number, which here I've got a 6, I'm going to just move that to the other side. So I'm just going to subtract 6, and I'm also going to write plus and leave a little blank so I make sure that I complete the square. If I add it to one side, I got to add it to the other side to keep my equation balanced. Okay, now this one's a little trickier because it's going to involve a fraction anytime your b value is odd. So my b value here is negative 9. I'm going to divide that by 2 and square it. What am I going to add to both sides? You just raise your hand and tell me, what am I going to add to both sides? What do we think?
81 over 4.
Yes, okay. 81 is the 9 squared, 4 is the 2 squared. So 81 over 4. All right, now, just remember, especially if you have to work with the fraction, whatever you square, I swear to you that's what's going to be in the factors. So we squared negative 9 over 2. So this is going to be x minus 9 over 2 squared. Okay, now, we all know how to add fractions, yes, no? Okay, so now I'm going to show you my favorite button on the calculator so we can have the calculator do it for us. Okay, so I'm just going to do this really quick, and some of these depends on which one you have. The 83s don't have this, so I'm just going to do it, but 84s do have a fraction key, but I just use the parentheses. So I'm going to take negative 6, and I'm going to add, and I'm just going to use a parenthesis key, 81 divided by 4 to that. Okay, now, I don't want the decimal here, but I want to show you a little cheat. I literally use this on a daily basis. Maybe not on the weekend. Okay, but otherwise, if I'm at school, I use this. Maybe not in the summer. Maybe sometimes. I don't know. Okay. Actually, I probably do in my sleep. Anyway, now, okay, so I just added that. Gave me a decimal. You don't want that. You're going to hit two buttons, but you're going to hit one of them twice. So the math button, it's the fourth button down here on the far left. It should be the same on an 84 or an 83. Just hit math real quick. That very first thing, it says FRAC, that stands for fraction. Not going to do anything, not going to move anywhere. You're just going to go down in your bottom right corner and you're going to hit enter 2 times. And that is going to convert that into a fraction for you in lowest terms. So that way we don't have to get a common denominator. I mean, I know you could, but we're just trying to save a little bit of time. So again, I'm just going to go through what I did one more time. So I just did negative 6. I put my fraction in parentheses. The parenthesis keys are right above the 8 and 9. Did 81, division key 4, close my parentheses. You have to hit enter, and then you just do math, enter, enter, and that will convert it to a fraction in lowest terms for you. Okay, now, just trying to save you some time. We're going to take a square root. And you're like, oh, garbage. No, it's not bad, I promise. I promise. All right, so x minus 9 over 2, the square root and squared cancel each other out. Now, I do need my plus and minus symbol, but here's the deal. Whenever you do this with completing the square, if you don't have an actual number, if you end up with a fraction, it will always have a 4 on the bottom, which is a perfect square. So the bottom of that would just be 2. The top of the fraction, 57, that does not break down under a square root. That's a prime number. So that is as simplified as that gets. It'd be radical 57 over 2. Now here's why I was telling you guys don't write the decimal. You can get x by itself here. When you add this 9 over 2 to the other side, these are actually like fractions. They have a common denominator. So typically when you see a question, I can actually squish that together. They both have a 2 on the bottom and write that as 9 plus or minus square root of 57, the whole thing over 2. If you guys remember doing the quadratic formula in Algebra 1, I know we haven't done it yet in this unit, we will, but you may have seen answers that would look like that. So that's what's going on there. That's why that looks a little bit rough, but that would be our 2 answers there. The plus or minus gives us 2 things, yeah.
On test, we wrote the first one.
I don't care, yeah, if I'm grading it, I don't care, that's fine. You can leave it separate if you want to, that's fine with me. Okay, good question. Anybody else have a question? Okay, I'm going to do one more with you. Now, all right, so this is already kind of set up decently for us. I am going to do plus a little blank just to leave myself a space. Negative 16 plus a little blank there. Okay, when I do this one, I'm going to do 7, just positive 7 over 2 squared, which I cannot simplify in terms of like I can't divide 7 by 2 or reduce that in any way, but I can square it. Can anybody raise your hand and tell me what would you add to both sides here to complete the square? Yes, ma'am. Okay, 49 over 4. Okay, now, on the left, right, whatever you square, I promise you, that's your factor. So I squared 7 over 2. This should be x plus 7 over 2 squared. Now, I'm grabbing my calculator. You can get a common denominator if you want to do it that way too. I'm just trying to save some time. So I'm going to do negative 16 plus, and then I'm just going to put parentheses, 49 divided by 4. I'm going to hit the enter button so I get the decimal on the screen, and then you just hit math, enter, enter, and it will make it into a fraction in lowest terms for you. Yay. All right, this is negative 15 over 4. All right, so to finish this up, I'm just going to take square root. Now, what's going to happen on the left, square root and square just cancel each other out, so this is just x plus 7 over 2. Now, this guy over here, the bottom of this fraction is just going to be 2. What would you write on the top? What would you write on the, you can't break down 15, but what would you write on the top? I, yeah, good. Okay, so just get rid of the negative, I radical 15. All right, the I just takes care of the negative. 15 does not break down under square root. 4 becomes 2 under a square root. That's where that square root of 4 is 2. That's where that came from. Now, I'm going to move this 7 over 2 to the other side. Just subtract it. So it'd be negative 7 over 2 plus or minus I radical 15 over 2. If you want to leave it like that, I seriously don't care. If you want to squish it together, this would be negative 7 plus or minus I radical 15 all over 2. Is anybody having a question about the completing the square?